This never happened. Hello. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Youth Open Shop Live. My name's Ryan. I'm here at the Ogden Bicycle Collective. I'm here with JP and Kirsty, and we're here to answer your questions and help you learn more about bikes. So if you have any questions whatsoever, now this is a live stream that we do every Tuesday at 5 right now. And as always, we'll always let you know if that changes. But if you want to join us live, you can join us on the Zoom webinar by going to tiny.cc/YOS-Live. Or if you're watching us after the fact, we are put all our videos on YouTube. So you can watch us there, watch previous episodes, watch future episodes that haven't happened yet, but you'll have to be in the future as well. And then if you want to, you can, if you can't watch us live and you can't submit your questions live, you can always go to follow the links below in the description to submit a question after the fact. But yeah, so this is a really interesting one. Last week we went over different kinds of bikes, but I wanted to go over more in depth, the very fundamental building blocks of bikes. And that's what we're going to be going over today. Now, before we go into that, we have some safety rules that we're going to go into. First, got the internet safety rules. Now, it's very important that you follow these. And then we've also got work safety rules. And if you want to learn more about those are at this link below, tiny.cc/YOS-L rules. So yeah, go to that link and then you'll be able to learn more about how to participate, how to get involved. We got some big things coming up. So if you get involved now, you'll be first in line for the big things that happen. And that's not hype. That's like actual things that are going to happen. More on that later. Anyway, today we're going to be going over some of the most basic things in the world. JP, if you could zoom in on this just really quick. Sorry, threw JP a curveball. Ball bearings. These are in everything. Now, let's go back. Before we get into that, we're actually going to go over why these are so important. Now, bikes would not be the same without them. If you were just going down the road, you wouldn't be able to like ride as smoothly. It would be a lot harder to ride so smoothly down the road. Or if you're going over huge bumps, these ball bearings, these tiny little metal balls are super important. So let's start by going over what are these and where they all began. Now, back in the day, these things go all way back. The soonest we know about them written down are in Egypt and Mesopotamia. Here we've got this cool like drawing of how they did it back then. And you'll notice there's like these tiny little sticks over there. What they do is, say my hand is the ground, they'd take logs or other round cylindrical things, they'd lay them in order next to each other, and then they put a giant block. Just pretend this is a giant block of sandstone. And they just roll it along. And when you got to the end, you have to go and you'd have to run this all the way up to the front. And so that's how bearings started, because they bear the weight of the giant thing that they're holding. Now, later on, here's a really cool picture made by Da Vinci. He was drawing a helicopter and he came up with this drawing where the bearings, rotated around a central cylinder and then a cage surrounded them. So that way they didn't so they stayed in order. And then we get into modern day where you've got the Industrial Revolution, where they started using them in big machines and all sorts of processes, all sorts of things. And now ball bearings are everywhere. Of course, if anything that rolls, most likely has ball bearings in it. So if you have a car or a giant machine, or even a smaller machine like a washing machine, it's ball bearings, or a fan. This little fan here, it's got a bearing that holds the blades against the motor, so that way the motor just has to worry about spinning the blades, and then the blades just kind of rotate on their own. And then, of course, other things as well. We've got myself a skateboard wheels. Those have bearings, they're very important. Got myself half a Razor scooter. it's got bearings, even though it's not got its other half. At least it's got bearings. It's got out going for it. And then, of course, other things too. Oh, the tips of pens. That little tip inside there is actually a ball bearing. There's a little ball that rolls around and distributes ink. And then even padlocks. The little divot on the inside of a padlock, a lot of specialty locks, a little bearing will go in there and lock it. So yeah, ball bearings are everywhere. Now, the bearings that we know today are smooth metal balls. They're just nearly perfectly round. And they come, and they're usually made of hardened steel. Now, the reason they're so important is when you're riding your bike, let me zoom in, get in real close here. When you're riding your bike, they roll smoothly next to each other without bumping, without scratching. But the other cool thing about them is, like, for mountain bikes, if you're going over big jumps, now obviously you go over too big of a jump, you can wreck your bike, but part of this is these are made out of hardened steel. So, sorry, is that too close, too far away?
No, that's okay.
Okay, so part of it is that these are incredibly hard and they're a sphere. So you can break these. I won't do that right now with a hammer. I'm sure that there's all sorts of videos on YouTube of people breaking ball bearings. But we'll just stay focused on this table here for now. But they're so hard that they're very hard to break. And usually other parts of the bike will break before the ball bearings do. So if your ball bearings break, there's usually a reason. But it was kind of interesting. Earlier today, I was working on a bike that I was going to donate. Now this bike is pretty normal. It spins, but I noticed it only spins in one direction. I try spinning it the other way, it stops. And so I got a closer look. And if you look in here, let me undo this nut here. Where'd my wrench go? It's behind me. If I undo this, now there's bearings in every part of the bike that spins. The handle, like in the stem where the handlebars connect to the frame, in the wheels, in the bottom bracket where the crank, where the pedals connect to the frame. But check this out. The bearings escaped. And this is what it used to look like. Let me get this. This is what it, well, this is a bigger one, but this is kind of what it used to look like. A bunch of metal balls all inside a little retainer. Now this, it's called a retainer, kind of like if you ever had those for your teeth, keeps your teeth. That's the dental retainer. I used to have one when I was a kid. Kept my teeth in place and moved them around. This keeps the ball bearings in place and keeps them from escaping. But as you can see, this retainer really just took a beating and fell apart. And then the ball bearings got everywhere. And it actually wore away the metal in the hub of this wheel. So now that's just hanging out there. So that's a broken wheel. We're going to have to replace that if we're going to put it on another bike. But anyway, let me put this aside, hang this back up here. What we're going to go over is the different kinds of modern ball bearings. Like I said, in their most basic form, they're just metal balls just hanging out there. But then we've got these that are inside a retainer or a cage. And this keeps them evenly spaced apart so they don't run, but also makes it so you don't have to use as many. And then we've got this. This is called a sealed cartridge bearing or a cartridge bearing or a enclosed bearing, or nowadays, if you put little things on the side of it, you can call it a fidget spinner. So yes, if you remember those, man, that was an old, is that a dead meme now, fidget spinners? But inside this little cover here, you flip it around and there's a bunch of ball bearings in there. So we go and enclose them so that way dust and dirt doesn't get inside. And so they don't wear down. Now, we're going to go over real quick what a bad ball bearing looks like. Let's see. All my bearings got mixed up. I've lost my bearings, which is a way of saying I'm lost in the woods. But, well, it's generally how I use it. I don't get lost in the woods often, but it happens. Shoot. Oh, here they are. All right, so let's see if we can zoom in. You can see bearings are very greasy. So let's see if the camera can pick up. The dark spots on this bearing are rust.
You can come closer.
Okay, how's that?
That's good.
Yeah, so if you see that rust on that bearing, sometimes it'll get really bad. And that'll just eat away the bearing and make it weaker and weaker. And then sometimes you'll find, and that's why I was hoping I could find the bearings that were in, let's zoom back out now. I was hoping I could find the bearings that were inside that wheel because they're most likely worn down to where they're even not completely round anymore. They're probably flat on one side. And that happens when they rub against a surface for too long. Because even though they're made of hardened steel, even hardened steel can get worn down if it's worn down too long. I'm going to put these away so I don't accidentally mix them in with the good bearings. But so those are the types of bearings you're going to find on a bike. And let me show you I'm just going to show you how to install bearings. Now, since there's so many bearings on a bike, you have to take care of them and you have to make sure they're in good conditions. And that is something we're going to go over next week. So if your wheel is loose, if it's wiggly, that's how this wheel over here, that's how that got started. It's because it was wiggly and someone didn't tighten it enough. So next week, join us. We're going to go over how to adjust the different ball bearings and the different spots where those need to be adjusted. So that way your bike, it doesn't end up like this poor wheel over here that's just been chewed up and spit out and it's lost its bearing. Sad. Anyway, so I've got myself a good little example here. This is the bearing of the race. And you can call it a race because if you put a bearing inside of it, I'll put this one inside of it. Okay, let me bring it in close. It just races around inside that curve. That's why it's called, so the cup that holds the bearings, that's called the race. And then there's another part. Sometimes it's on, this is called the spindle. But this part here is called the cone because when you put the bearings inside, it pushes the bearings into the race. So that's what's called the cone. Sometimes it's built in, and sometimes this is an axle of a wheel. Sometimes the cone is a nut that you can tighten and loosen. But on the bottom bracket of this bike that I got this from, you actually tighten the race or the cup of the bearing. But I'm going to demonstrate real quick how to put this bracket, this bearing that's in a bracket. No, retainer. Sorry, I got my dental terminology mixed up and it bled into my bike knowledge. So we're going to put this bearing retainer inside the race and then demonstrate how this goes. Because now we put it in there, this just spins. And that's cool. That's just fun. Okay. But before we do that, though, we actually have to prepare it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get grease. This is waterproof grease. This is, we just get this grease in a big old bulk can, but you can get it in smaller cans where you can just use it, put the lid back on, and store it somewhere safe, obviously. But I don't think is this flammable?
I don't think so.
Okay, so far it looks like this only causes allergic skin reactions. But always be careful and always read the safety label when you're using chemicals and greases and oils to make sure that it is safe to use, and if it isn't, how to use it so that way you can be safe. So some people might be allergic to it, so make sure if you are, that if you get it on your skin and it starts itching or burning, but not like burning, that'd be bad. If it's like burning, go see a doctor. If it's just kind of itchy and irritated, like a sunburn, then hurry and go wash it off with soap and water. But anyway, always read the labels, but this one's pretty safe. So anyway, that I do not brush my teeth with anymore. I've got a new toothbrush for that. But this one, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to paint the inside of the race. We're off to the races. We're just putting grease in there. And then I take the bearing, it's in the retainer, and then I paint that with a little bit of grease too, just all over. Oops, and then you drop it for good luck. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that. You might lose the bearings. If you drop the bearings, we'll get into that to a second, but make sure you get the right size ones. So I'm going to go ahead. I've greased the bearings and the retainer. I've greased the race. I put it in. Now, this one's interesting. You'll notice that it's got a lip around this side, and then this side is just the bearings. So what you do is you put the more exposed side into the race of the, you put the more exposed sides into the race, and then the side with the lip around the retainer, that goes against the cone. It's like that. So that way it'll spin. Now right now it's all goopy because it's covered in grease. Now it doesn't spin as freely like a fidget spinner anymore, but what this grease will do is it'll keep it from rusting, so it doesn't end up like those rusty bearings that we had earlier, and they don't wear down as fast. And so it prevents rusting, it keeps them from sticking, and it's just generally good to have these just super goopy. That's a technical term here in the bike world, super goopy. The more I say that, the weirder it sounds. So I'm going to stop that now. But now if you put it in backwards, you'll notice it does not spin as well. That's because it's just spinning against the metal. It's metal on metal. The retainer is blocking the bearings from actually touching it. So that's how you do it if the bearings you're putting in have a retainer. I'm going to put these aside, get the goop off of there. We'll use that later in another bike. But let's say that you don't have the retainer anymore and you just have loose bearings. First off, you want to make sure that you get the right size bearings. So if you have any of the old bearings, even if they're worn out, cracked, dented, chipped, worn down, flat, whatever, just make sure that you have at least, like if you can find some of the old bearings, that way you can measure them. Now this is a special ruler with lots of holes in it. What you do with this is you put the bearing on that hole. And if it can go through the hole, that's what size the bearing is. So I put it in that one, boom. That wasn't a magic trick, that just fell through. Sometimes you have to tap it through with your finger. But you find what size of bearing it is, and then you make sure that you get all the same size. You don't want all these small ones and then a giant bearing just hanging out with them, because that giant bearing is going to take all the weight and it's not going to be fun. So anyway, to do that, what you do is you just put extra grease inside there, just enough so that way you can just put the bearings inside there and they'll stick in there because they're just stuck inside the grease. And we're going to line, what you do is you just line the inside of the race with grease. With the bearings after it's been lined with grease. You notice they don't fall out anymore. That's because the grease holds them in there. So it's always important to grease them in there when you're building it for the first time. And man, I am making a greasy mess all over this table. Luckily, I'm going to clean it up afterwards. Always clean up your messes after you make messes. Don't leave the mess for the next person or for just in general. Most people will appreciate it if you don't leave a mess for them. All right, so I put as many bearings as I could inside of there. So then what I do is, let's say this we're going in second, I just put it in there, and then you'll notice it's spinning. And the bearings are rolling along on the inside. So if you have bearings that are just, it's grinding and it's not running very smooth, you might need to you might not want to shake it all over the place because the bearings will fall out regardless if you shake it over too much. But if you are running out of bearing, like if your bearings aren't in the proper state or they're worn down or rusted or flat or whatever, you're going to need to get new bearings. What you do is you just find bearings of the same size. You can pick these up at a hardware store or sometimes bike shops. A lot of bike shops have them in different sizes, and you just take in a bearing that you have, and then they'll help. Hopefully they'll have a measurement tool to measure what size of bearings you need. But yeah, that's how you put in bearings. Now, next week, we're going to go over how to adjust them. So let's say your bike is old or out of shape, and it's all wiggly and rackety. That's what we're going to be covering next week. So, cool. So that's it for the work portion today. Now, before we go into every week, we do a work portion where we go over a certain topic, and then we go into a Q&A of just off topic, any question you have about any. What's up? Oh, was my eyes wandering? I do that.
No.
Oh, JP's trying to photobomb me with his finger. So, so yeah, every week we do the work portion where we teach a simple bike thing, and then we do a Q&A where you can ask any question, whether it's about today's topic or about a past topic or about something we haven't covered yet. And before we get into that Q&A, we'd like to invite you guys, hey, like the video, subscribe, share with your friends, join us for the next Youth Open Shop Live if you can. I forgot the title of the thing for a second there. But go ahead and join us and submit your questions. If you can't join us live, submit your questions through the Google form that's linked below. And then, yeah, join us for that. All right, so now we're going to get into the Q&A. Now, unfortunately, a little problem with our teleprompter, so Q&A might be a little short. But I did have one question that was just off screen. So I think this one did come in through the form that is linked below. But the question is, how my seat is all wiggly and it just won't tighten no matter how much I tighten it down. All right, so this is interesting. I should have prepared a little better for this, but bike seats and the posts that they sit on, I had one right here. Oh well. Hey, thanks. So this is the seat, or this is the seat post, and the seat would go right here. Now on every seat post, most every seat post, watch, this one doesn't have it, but most seat posts, this one had it printed on, but it wore off. A lot of seat posts will have it engraved in there. They'll have a number like 27.2 or 30.6 or 25.4 if you're crazy. And what that means is that's the diameter. That's how thick the post is. And it goes by 0.2 millimeters. And 0.2 millimeters, I'll have to look this up, but it's like, I can't remember how thick a human hair is, but it's right along in there. It's really thin. So a centimeter is about the width of your finger. A millimeter is 1/10 that width. And then 0.2 millimeters, it's like the thickness of your fingernail. So it's really important that you have the exact right size of seat post. So if your seat post isn't fitting in there and it's just wiggling and wiggling, you might need a new seat post. So you have to go and find out exactly what measurement. We have a measurement tool that you stick what size it is. But yeah, take your bike to a bike shop and say, hey, do you have any seat posts in this size? And they'll help you out and hopefully find you one that fits. So that's, I wouldn't recommend using any kind of shim. One time I found a guy came in, he said, my seat post isn't going up and down. We pulled it out and it was wrapped in cloth because it was wiggling. So we wrapped it in like an old t-shirt and put that in there. And then it got stuck there years later and that person gave it to someone else and they didn't know there was a t-shirt stuck down in their bike. So make sure you find the right seat post and don't try to use t-shirts to make it the right size. It doesn't usually work. Anyway, so that's kind of the Q&A for today. Again, thank you so much for joining us. You guys go out there, ride your bikes, have a great day, and we'll see you soon.